Now, MPs investigating whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over a lockdown party or lockdown parties at number 10 are meeting today, a bit later on this morning, to conclude their inquiry. That's in the wake of the former Prime Minister's dramatic resignation on Friday.
Is there any future for the former Prime Minister in British politics? We're joined now by the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove. Mr Gove, I know you've had a very busy morning. Thank you for joining us. Well, what do you think about the future for Boris Johnson? Is he still an important figure in British politics who could make a comeback, stand again as an MP? Or should he, in the words of your former colleague Tim Lawton, shut up and go away?
Hi, good morning, Susanna. Very nice to see you and Richard this morning. With respect to Boris's decision, he's made an own individual decision to stand down at this point. I respect that decision. I think we should also respect his achievements as Prime Minister, the role that he played in the war in Ukraine, his responsibility for a speedy vaccine rollout, and also his success in breaking the Brexit deadlock. When it comes to predicting the future, though, I'm not really the person to ask. I once wrote a book called Michael Portillo, The Future of the Right, so I don't have a particularly stellar record as a clairvoyant. So,
no, but
again, I don't know.
That's fair enough. Yeah. None of us can predict the future. But what would you like to happen? You have had a mixed opinion of Boris Johnson over the years. You once backed him to run your party. You then said that he couldn't provide the leadership or build the team for the task ahead. You then served with him. You also then lost your job with him. I mean, I don't know where you are this morning on Boris Johnson. You've already paid tribute to him, but would you like him to be an MP again? Well,
I think the history that you mentioned just emphasises that Boris is a figure who contains multitudes, as it were. And I think in any assessment of his career to this point, I think that it's only fair that people remember the successes that he was responsible for and his contribution to public life.
But Michael Gove, do you think,
exactly.
Is he a loss? You've said he's had enormous number of achievements. Do you consider him a loss to politics if he doesn't stand again as an MP?
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to mention those achievements is that I think that when someone departs office, it's important to, remember the better side, to be, to think with grace, infusing your response. As to the future, my focus on the future is not on Boris's career per se, or not on Boris's future jobs per se. It is the jobs of millions of people in this country that will be protected and enhanced by their government making the right decisions on everything from halving inflation, reducing debt, growing the economy, making sure that we cut waiting lists, and making sure that we stop the boats.
Let me ask another question then, because you haven't said whether you think he's a loss to British frontline politics or not. Do you think he misled Parliament?
Well, I don't know. So, I mean, on your previous question, I do think, there is a loss when someone like Boris departs the stage. I do think that, and I think that was implicit in what I said earlier. On the question of whether or not he misled Parliament, then a parliamentary committee has been set up to investigate that. All of us as MPs voted for that committee to do its job. It can't have been easy for them. I haven't yet seen the report. It's going to be published later this week. When it is published, we can all then make a judgment on that report. But I just want to say that I'm grateful to MPs for taking on that role, because, as I say, it's no easy thing to consider the massive evidence there.
Well, one of the achievements that you haven't actually mentioned is the extraordinary victory that Mr Johnson achieved for your party 3 years ago. He won you a thumping majority. He put paid to Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes.
And he garnered an extraordinary number of votes across the country in constituencies where you didn't expect to win, and you did win. He's going to leave a huge hole, isn't he? A Boris-shaped hole in the party. Whatever the future holds, his departure is quite seismic.
Well, you're right that it was a significant victory and that there were people who supported us who hadn't supported the Conservatives before. That's why my job as Levelling Up Secretary is to make sure that those communities from Redcar to Blackpool South get the investment, the care, the attention that they deserve and that they were denied by, Labour in the past, in order to make sure that we do right by them and that we make sure that opportunity is spread more equally across the country.
Do you think that politics...
But on your point about the size of the whole, look, none of us are indispensable.
Do you think...
there are big figures in politics who depart the scene, and then there is a new generation that takes things forward. So after previous prime ministers have stood down, then it's always been the case that new administrations are formed, and I think the British public will want to know at the next election what our plans are for the future and what other parties' plans are for the future. Obviously, they'll reflect on what it is that we've achieved, the significant improvements that we've made in education, the investment that we're securing for the tech sector and so on.
Let's keep it to Boris, rather than going on about what achievements you may have got to by the time of the next election. I mean, the thing about Boris Johnson is, you couldn't deny this, he made politics damned interesting and extremely colourful. Would you accept that British politics and Conservative politics are this morning rather drabber, drearier place?
Well, I think I'd agree with the first half of that. Boris certainly brought colour and panache to British politics, but I don't think it's drab or dreary. I think that it is focused, efficient, it is professional and determined. And I think that, at certain points in the political life of our country, there's been what the Germans would call Sturm und Drang. There's been drama. And then at other points, and I think this is critically one of those, what people want is a government that is focused on their priorities. And that is why the Prime Minister has been very clear that our job, my job, is to play our part in halving inflation, in growing the economy, in reducing debt, getting the public finances in the right shape, making the NHS work better by reducing waiting lists, and also, of course, by stopping the boats and dealing with illegal migration.
Yeah, there's a mountain to climb on those pledges. Boris Johnson says the party was in a better shape under his leadership. Who was the better leader of the Conservative Party, Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson? Who's the better Prime Minister?
Rishi.
Why?
Well, I think we all know that I listed some of the things that Boris did, which were significant achievements. But Rishi is bringing a professionalism and focus to government today. The Prime Minister is outlining proposals to ensure that we get more investment in the technology sector, one of the fastest growing parts of our economy, and the focus that he's bringing to that, the intellect that he brings to bear, the hard work, the sheer dedication to public service mark Rishi out as a great Prime Minister.
How come your party's so far behind in the polls?
Well, wait until the general election. I think that it is always the case. I think politicians always say this, but it is true that in the period in between elections, whoever happens to be in government tends to find that their poll rating goes down. And then as you get closer to an election, people start reflecting on the intrinsic merits of the two principal candidates for Prime Minister and the two manifestos or prospectuses for the future. And I think in a straight choice between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, when people ask themselves, well, who represents the future here? Who's the person who's best equipped to deal with the challenges of tomorrow? Is it Sir Keir Starmer, a figure from the past, or Rishi Sunak, who's leaning into and shaping the future?
Well, if you were to hear... I'm asking you this on a personal level.
Yeah.
If you were to hear, say, in a week's time, that Mr Johnson was going to stand again as an MP, would your heart lift or would it sink?
Well, again, I think... it's a fair question, Richard. I think that... it's unlikely to happen in a week's time, and also there's a critical thing that will happen in the next week.
Well, if it's a fair question, could you answer it? Would your heart lift or would it sink?
Oh, no. But in order to answer a question of the kind that you pose, you've got to have all of the facts there. So you're asking about what will happen in a week's time. Within a week's time, we'll have that report from the Privileges Committee. So, it's a fair question in a court of law, whether or not you think that someone... deserves to win or to lose a case. But until you've heard all the evidence, you can't make that conclusion. I haven't heard all the evidence, so we need to see that report. I can make a judgment on the things that Boris has done in the past, which I think are good, but what I can't do is preempt that report.
No, of course not, but the evidence must be pretty damning, otherwise he wouldn't have resigned, would he?
We know what happened at number 10.
Yeah.
We know what happened under lockdown, and we know what Boris Johnson said in the House of Commons.
Well, I'm very old-fashioned in lots of ways, and one of them is that I'd like to read that report. MPs have worked hard to, come to an appropriate conclusion. I think it would be disrespectful to them, and indeed everyone, for me to preempt that, and then all of us will have an opportunity to read it and to make that judgment.
And was it disrespectful of Boris Johnson to preempt it and to resign?
He must make his own decisions. He had the chance to read it, actually, I think. Certainly he was informed, I understand, from reporting about some of its conclusions, and he made his own judgment. And, that is, again, I know politicians say this all the time, but it's true. That is a matter for him. He will have made his own judgment.
OK. Thank you, Mr Gove. Thank you for your time this morning.
No, not at all. Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Susanna.